Yo, what's going on, guys? It's your boy. Welcome back to another video. Today we're going to be talking about the horror movie Drop that released this weekend. I saw it. For the most part, I enjoyed it, but gotta be honest with you, it's a really ridiculous movie. Let's talk about it.
Modern Movie Review.
Okay, so right off the bat, I did say I enjoyed it, and for the most part, I do stand by that. I think that there's a lot of elements in the first act of this movie that are very entertaining, and I also want to go ahead and address, I have a couple of biases. I went and saw this movie as a part of AMC Unseen, and if you don't know what that is, basically sometimes they'll do a preview showing of a movie that's coming out, like, at some point in the upcoming month, and so when I went to see it, I was in a really packed theater because the AMC Unseen tickets, they're like $5 or something like that. So they're discounted tickets. You get to see a mystery movie. This happened to be the movie. It was a full theater. It was a horror movie. And that's a great time. I feel like any horror movie in a packed theater is usually significantly better. And I'm also incredibly biased towards the actor, Brandon. Is it Brandon? Brandon? I think it's Brandon Skellner. Absolutely fantastic at this. He's incredibly charming. And I want him to play Batman in the upcoming DC universe, so I might be really biased towards this movie. But that being said, to dive into some of the things that I think make this movie special and some of the things that made it, in my opinion, at least worth watching, this movie was incredibly funny. I think that they had a general idea of, okay, what if we had a horror movie that takes place on a first date? And they really drove that premise home. I think that they did a really good job of building up that kind of awkward tension, kind of bringing up some of the, like, online dating culture. And as somebody who's done a lot of online dating, they've made a couple of jokes about it that I was like, I can relate to that. I think that that's cool. So humor, obviously subjective. Horror, obviously subjective. So I enjoyed this movie, and I think that me going on a lot of first dates in the last 3 months has helped with this, because some of the awkward moments that happened in this, once again, I could relate to it, and I thought that it was really funny, and I think that they did a really good job of kind of building up that awkwardness. And then one of my favorite things about this is sometimes in movies they're able to include some random little side character where every time they're on the screen they kind of steal the show, and they did that with a random waiter in this movie. The waiter and the bartender both have a couple of moments in here that are really interesting and entertaining, and I love when a movie is able to do that, where it's a scene that's very, like, dramatic, and there's a lot of sequences with just the two main characters having, like, really interesting, deep conversations, and they have a lot to unpack, like, trauma-wise and why they're single at their age or whatever. And I think that they do a good job with those conversations. But then every once in a while, you're able to break the tension with this waiter who's on his first shift, and he's constantly doing a bunch of stuff that a waiter should not be doing, especially at this really high-end restaurant, and it's just hilarious. And I think that they do a really good job of kind of making it where you have a nice lighthearted tone, so when things do flip and it is like, oh my god, it's evil now, even though it is kind of ridiculous because, like, everything is through a phone screen, it feels a little more scary. I think that they do a good job of that little victim complex with her being so, like, overpowered by the scammer. The scammer is 100% taking advantage of her, and she feels so defenseless. There's cameras literally everywhere. She goes to the bathroom to try to get an escape. She can't. Her phone is bugged, so if she tries to, like, text something or make a little message on her phone, she can't do anything about it. And I think that that's interesting. I think that they do a good job of kind of building up the tension from one sequence to the next sequence, with her in convincingly throughout the night trying to do everything she can to at least let some other person know that she's in danger, but she can't. And I think that it does a really good job of making us feel as defenseless as she is. And as the night gets longer and longer and her date becomes more and more awkward, which that's another thing that I like about it, is, like, they don't shy away from the fact that if a girl does this on a first date, that guy is going to be, like, really like, wow, this date is a dud. But he stays the entire time. And I do think that, like, part of this movie, you do need to suspend your disbelief a little bit because of stuff like that. Like, Brendan Skellner's character would have to be insanely desperate to still be on this date this far into it. But that being said, I think that you throw your suspension of disbelief out the window for a little bit. It's a good ride with this movie. I think that, and I say this about most horror movies, it really would have benefited from being about 20 minutes shorter. That being said, I do think that there's a couple of horror moments that work relatively well. I love how they start this movie. I'm not going to spoil it because I want this to kind of be a spoiler-free review, but the way they start this movie is incredibly unexpected, and you kind of would expect it to be like one of those things where they're just like, wow, this is a sticky situation. You're probably wondering how I ended up here, and then, like, flashing back 24 hours, and it's not. It's a completely different scene that takes place at a completely different time, and the way that they keep revealing more and more about what happened during that very traumatic night throughout the course of the movie was interesting. Like, I wasn't expecting this movie to dive into the fact that, like, both of these characters who are on this first date have experienced a lot of trauma, and the fact that they're getting blackmailed right now is kind of bringing out the worst in them, and it's kind of like bringing back kind of like PTSD in a sense. And I think that is really interesting. I really enjoy the way that they're able to build these characters, and I might be biased because, like, I potentially might need to go to therapy, but this main character being a therapist and the guy kind of needing therapy from some of the shit that he's seen, I think that it makes them feel even more real. So that's good. But then on the flip side, when the really batshit crazy shit happens towards the end of this movie and there's people surviving things that they absolutely should not be surviving, it makes it a little more ridiculous. So if I had to break down this movie, first act, incredible. One of the funniest movies I've seen in forever. Second act, it starts to get a little slow. There's a little bit of, like, really cool suspense and tension happening. And I think that they kind of start treating it like a mystery a little bit. Like, originally she does tell the date that, oh my god, there's these drops happening. And then, you know, he does that thing where he circles the building. And they're kind of, like, trying to, like, figure out who it could potentially be. And she has her kind of suspicions of, oh, it might be this person. Oh, it might be that person. Oh, it might be this person. And it does a really good job of kind of setting up kind of, like, almost a whodunit element to this movie that I feel like without it, this movie would be so one-dimensional, it's not even funny. But that being said, there's a lot of secondhand embarrassment in that second act that I'm not really a huge fan of. I think that for the sake of horror, I understand that that's one of the scariest things you could do when someone's just being threatened over a cell phone. But you made the premise being threatened over a cell phone, so it's not that scary, and that is kind of on the people who wrote it or came up with this plot outline at least. And then we go into the third act. Everything goes off the rails. I think that there's a couple of elements of it that are kind of interesting, like the fact that the couple is kind of able to work together to eliminate the threat because they realize what's happening, and he kind of starts to understand, like, oh my god, she's being blackmailed, and this is the guy who's blackmailing her, and they're able to kind of, like, communicate without actually communicating to kind of, like, poison the guy that's been threatening them the entire night. I thought that was interesting. But then, once he realizes he's been poisoned and he whips out a gun and he's immediately just trying to kill everybody, that's weird. And then they do the thing where, if you've seen the trailers, you know, at one point a window breaks and then they just get, like, sucked into a vacuum. I don't know a lot about gravity. I'm pretty sure that's not how that works. I'm like 99% confident that that's not how that works. Also, she survives that. Also, a lot of the people in this movie get shot and they survive that. So that's unique. That's interesting. That's a choice. And I think that the third act being that bad is pretty bad, but also the love story, the chemistry, the building of the tension and stuff like that all throughout this movie. The first two acts are so enjoyable that it kind of made me enjoy that third act despite it not necessarily being the best. So I do think overall, if I had to give this movie a rating on a scale of 1 to 100 to give it a grade, I'm going to give it a solid 70. I think that it obviously could be significantly better. I do think if it wasn't so cartoonishly bad at the end of the movie, it could potentially actually be really decent. And I think that overall, the vibes are there. I think that the concept of a romance horror is really interesting. And with movies like Hard Eyes and now this movie, I love that we're getting to see this a bit more. And I kind of like this little subgenre. So I personally like this film. I don't think I would recommend going and seeing it in theaters, but I will say it is significantly better than the trailers lead you to believe. But yeah. That being said, that was it for this video, guys. Thank you guys so much for coming by and checking it out. I love and appreciate you guys so much for watching. And if you liked it, feel free to like and subscribe, and I'll hopefully see you guys in the next one. Peace out. Bow. Bow.